Welcome to a special segment tonight on the Just Another Castle podcast. I am unoClay, as you know, and for this section of the show, it's just going to be me interviewing possibly our first dev ever on the show. I'm not sure. We may have had a couple guests on before that have been involved in game development. I'm not sure if we've ever had a dev on before that has completed an entire game, and I'm positive we've never had anyone on that published a game to a Nintendo platform. So without further ado, may I welcome Seth Scott to the show. Hi, Seth. Tell us who you are and all about your little game you just got out on Switch.
Yeah, awesome. First of all, yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to be here. And yeah, I just released a game called Membrane, and it is, I've been calling it a creative action puzzle game, kind of a weird little mashup phrase that I kind of came up with during development, because I didn't really necessarily want to just call it a puzzle platformer or just a platformer or just a puzzle game. And the game was designed around this idea of allowing creative space for the player while they're playing the game. So it kind of has puzzle elements, but it also has this kind of action-y platformer element as well. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I've been playing a lot of it since it dropped. I literally tried to do the internet first type of meme by going in there at like 12:01 when it dropped and
Nice.
trying to download. And I don't know what time zone Nintendo lets you unlock a game, but I had the game. And then I kept trying to start it, and it was frustrating me because it kept saying, this game is not available. And I'm like, it is definitely available. It's right there on my home screen, and I paid for it. What the heck?
Yeah.
But that was about a week ago. I've been playing the heck out of it without trying to, I don't know what the phrase is, butter your bread or some kind of antiquated phrase. I really enjoy the game.
Awesome.
I'm gonna get you to give us a little bit more detail on some of the game. I mean, maybe we'll start out a little bit about yourself and get some context for this conversation, and then we'll talk a little bit about the process of getting the game out and the development process.
Awesome.
But I think just for the listeners who haven't seen it, I did post a video on my YouTube channel, unoClay Gaming, of some gameplay mechanics. If you want to check that out while you're listening to this, you could see the game. But I think that's an apt description. You said, did you say action puzzle platformer? Is that how you termed it?
Yeah, I've been calling it a creative action puzzle game.
Okay.
Creative action puzzle platformer.
Okay. That seems very apt. That matches what I think of. It looks like a platformer, but it's got more of a kind of physics engine to it, a little bit of puzzle elements kind of combined with it's World of Goo. Let's just say it. It reminds me of World of Goo a little bit, not entirely.
Yeah. No, I would, gladly, and I would be lying if I said that wasn't one of my main inspirations for the game.
Certainly.
And I'm a huge fan of Tomorrow Corporation and their games. I think, obviously when World of Goo came out, I was super into it because it was like this 2-person team, and they released the game on Nintendo, and it was a fantastic game.
Absolutely.
Gameplay was good, music was good, art was cool.
Yeah. And I think it's a perfect pedigree. I don't mean to even compare your game automatically to something, but if someone hasn't seen it and is just tuning into this, I think it's the kind of thing that you could it would be natural to come up with a conversation to compare it to. That's all That's all I wanted to say about that. So
no, I think that's great, and I remember back when I was first coming up with this idea for Membrane, I was like, I love World of Goo. It was so fun building all this weird stuff and kind of figuring out how you could, optimize your solution or even just come up with something weird. But I always remember being like, oh, I just want to like run around or jump around on those weird bendy structures that I'm making. I don't want to just put stuff there and have it interact. I was like, oh, it would be fun to just make weird things, but then also be able to jump on them and interact with them a little more. And that's kind of where one of the main design kind of ideas came about with Membrane.
Absolutely. Side note, I think you should send your resume and your game to them because I have the utmost respect for them. Longtime
Yeah.
listeners of our podcast will know I am I would like to think I'm the world's leading fanboy, but there's always a bigger fanboy, just face it.
Right.
There always is. But I am a humongous fan of Henry Hatsworth, which is a game that was on DS that was designed by one of the guys I think that works at Tomorrow Corporation now. I think my podcast mates get sick of hearing me talk about Henry Hatsworth at every opportunity, and none of them have ever played it. And we're gonna fix that someday. But
that's they're great, and I think just as a aside too, Little Inferno is my favorite game of theirs now.
Wow, right on. Okay,
but I love all their games, including Henry Hatsworth. Yeah,
we could debate long and hard about the merits or lack thereof for Little Inferno, but we'll have to save that for another time. I played through the whole thing and I have mixed feelings, but we can leave that for another time.
Deal, yeah. Sounds good.
Just to move on to the main point of meeting up tonight, because I think we could go on we can do a separate podcast, breakaway to the Tomorrow Corporation, and our thoughts about everything they've ever done. So we've talked about what Membrane is. But circling a little bit like back to you and me and why we're even talking here. You were part of the my IGN boards back in the day, as were the other guys on my podcast, my show. One of the reasons we wanted to get you on. And I asked them to give me some questions if they wanted to pass anything along to ask you. And one of the first things that came up, in fact, was they wanted to know, did your either education or professional development into game design coincide with your time during my IGN, or was this something that came along kind of after you were part of that community?
I guess, I mean, when I was this kind of more recent education and stuff, me going back to get my master's and stuff, was definitely after my IGN boards time.
Gotcha.
And I think I had been out of undergrad and stuff for a while, and was was born in the early 80s, so I've been playing and a fan of games for my entire life, and is always kind of I have a background in like art and music and kind of some creative fields, and games was always something that I was like tinkering with. I didn't, I don't have like a computer science background or anything like that, and I always kind of thought that, to make games you had to be a programmer, or you had to kind of have a little more of technical expertise that I lacked. So I was always messing around with it, and I think that messing around with it on my spare time, kind of with different game engines or platforms. And I think the part of the reason I got into the IGN boards was I felt like it was a way to kind of have a little bit more of a deeper conversation with people, rather than just, games journalism, which, I mean, maybe in some ways now it's evolved, but back then it felt like it was more just like previews and reviews and like very just marketplace type coverage.
Yeah, I think it's getting worse, to be honest with you, but it's hard to say. Everybody thinks it's getting worse all the time, but yeah, that's a complicated conversation. Sure.
Yeah, and I think that it started as something I was like, oh, I read some things that people like yourself or other guys and girls posted, and I was like, oh, this is cool. This person has similar interests in games or content that I do, and they're writing this like, I don't know, cool little article that probably would never get posted on some big game site, but it was like, I enjoyed reading it way more than the next AAA review or something like that.
Those were the days, weren't they? That was you literally very succinctly and almost gave me the warm fuzzies thinking back on that, because the way you described that, it's like, yeah, this was a way to have conversation about games in long format, sometimes or short format, depending, but the blogs and stuff, which was where I believe, you and I would intersect like that. That was neat. Well, so you mentioned that, you went back and got your master's, but at the same time, you kind of have hinted at some of the questions I wanted to ask you. You said, you didn't have a degree in computer science, but then you did mention a master's. So now, did you finish an undergrad in something else and then go back to school for something related to computer design, or just completely off script? The computer design is something that's self-taught. How did this come about?
Yeah, so my undergrad was in like fine arts, and I grew up with an artist my dad was an artist, my mom was a musician, so kind of grew up with art my whole life in various formats. Just, some stuff that I loved to do was to do art and whatever, but getting a bachelor's degree in fine arts, not the most lucrative thing to do.
I know the feeling.
So yeah, I had various jobs after undergrad, and I've always worked with my first job was like a camp counselor or junior camp counselor when I was 14, and worked with kids in education and also in kind of like summer camp type formats for a very long time. So I decided to get my teaching license and kind of become a full-time teacher. And that was something I was like really into and super passionate about for a handful of years. And then I kind of stumbled upon this program that I just graduated from, the NYU Game Center. And it's a fine art program, but it's game design. And the way that some of the faculty and some of the ways they talk about games and design and the medium of game design was just right up my alley. And they were, approaching games from a fine art perspective instead of just like a computer science or something perspective.
Wow.
So yeah, it just like instantly hit me, and I was like, wow, this seems like the perfect place for me.
That's amazing. I literally walked by, if you were at the main campus of NYU, I walked by your campus as recently as December. That's amazing. Wow, what a small world. And you sell it so well. I mean, and I'm hoping you're not still on their payroll, and this is just a pitch for NYU, because it's like, wow, that sounds great. I want to go there now.
Yeah, no, I am not on their payroll.
I'm kidding, but you really sell it well. It really sounds amazing. I mean, because I did do some undergraduate work in computer science, and I never had anything close to the response you just described, where that the philosophy almost you're describing of game design was somehow in the foreground of the experience.
Yeah, and it just really was something that I was like, man, if I'm going to go back, or if I'm going to get any kind of formal training in this is the place I would go. Because yeah, I could have obviously tried to go to some kind of programming I could have taken programming courses or gone back to school to learn computer science and stuff. But that kind of stuff just didn't necessarily isn't what I wanted to do. And then so I saw this and I was like, oh wow, this is cool, because you do learn programming, you do learn all aspects of game design, and this program really is a little bit more kind of catered towards like the indie side of gaming, where like you kind of as a developer wear multiple hats and not necessarily have to do everything, but most kind of indie devs have skills in lots of different kind of bags of game development.
Right. You have to.
Yeah. And so anyway, yeah, it was we were living in New Mexico at the time, my wife and I, and I was like, well, this seems amazing, and we're like, let's go for it. And so I just decided to apply, and I didn't make this decision I was going to go back to school and learn game design no matter, like, just keep at it. I was like, I'm going to try to get in here. If we do, we'll figure it out and see if it seems like the right decision, and if not, we'll just keep going on with our lives and figure out what's next.
Wow, what lucky happenstance, because one thing led to another, and as recently as moments before this interview, I called a friend to check the levels on my recording equipment, and this is not made up or in any way staged. He picked up the phone, and I could hear the music from Membrane playing in the background, and he
Nice.
goes, can you ask him how the F you finished level, like, I don't even know what level it was. He's relatively early in the game, and he's stuck on one of the like more difficult ones, and he's like describing it to me over the phone. And he goes, "Do you
That's
remember which
awesome.
one I mean?" And I'm like, "No." But you're just like ranting into the phone, and so the crazy coincidences and happenstance leading from you applying and moving from New Mexico to, I assume you
That's
went to
great.
New York University in New York City. Uh,
Actually, the campus for my school is in Brooklyn.
oh, in Brooklyn. Okay,
They
great.
have, yeah,
Okay,
they have another campus there in downtown Brooklyn,
gotcha.
just over. Yeah,
Gotcha. Okay, so you were there, and so you said you graduated relatively recently, right?
yeah, about a year, almost a year ago now. It was
Okay.
last spring.
Okay.
It's a 2-year master's program. Yeah.
Okay. And so, and I know this from looking up some information in prep for this, but I believe membrane was at least partially developed during your time at the university, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it started as my thesis project. Yeah, everybody there, they're last year take a handful of classes, but the main focus is kind of your thesis game,
Right.
which you can do with group or by yourself. I ended up kind of going solo,
Hmm.
but yeah, it started as my thesis, and then um,
Neat.
yeah,
Neat. So that kind of feeds into one of the questions I was going to ask. In terms of, let's not consider the application process for Nintendo and getting it out there. Like, and we all know, like, no great art is ever truly finished. It's only finished when they pry it out of your hands, and
right.
but in terms of a general idea, what would you say the timeline for development for the entire game was? Start of design
Right.
to pretty much like putting the final nuts and bolts together to make it run and be like what would be considered the finished product.
Yeah, it was basically a year,
Right.
and it's yeah, from like the very maybe a year and a couple weeks, but more or less about a year. A couple weeks before, a couple weeks like ahead of time, I was like the very first prototypes, and then that was like Thanksgiving of 2016. Um, and then basically the game was done this past December.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow.
and then the last couple months has just been going through certification and polishing stuff and fixing bugs and kind of fine tuning everything. But more or less the game was done this past December. So yeah, about a year.
Estimate of the number of hours you put into membrane. Do you have any concept?
Oh
I'm
my
sure you've
God.
thought about it. I mean, if you did an
I,
average of hours per day during your student life, are we talking? I know that's tough to ask, but we're talking thousands of hours. I'm sure if you're a one-man team, essentially doing everything, I would assume.
yeah, I have thought about it a couple times because it's like I was like, man, this is depressing. But yeah, I mean, it has to be thousands of hours. Like, it started as a thesis project, and I was working on it at least every day. But during school, and I was doing other stuff, but I was working weekends as well. And then last summer, I was in this incubator where I worked on it every day, and then like a full-time 40-hour-a-week job every day, and then also nights and weekends. And then this past fall was just like me working on the game. I don't know. The last 6 months, I feel like I probably put in as much like the last 4 months, I probably put in as much time as the first 8 months almost. I feel like,
Wow. Wow. So that like final stretch is just really bearish in terms of like cleaning it up and getting everything working perfectly so that when you go live, you don't have the nightmare of the game
right,
being a buggy piece of crap that everybody makes fun of on the internet. I can imagine the stress.
right. Oh my God. Yeah, it was, God, it was crazy. It was very hard, on myself and my wife. And, like, she has helped me with a bunch of stuff, and we're kind of transitioning into being a two-person team, and kind of for the next project working a little more side by side.
Wow. Excellent.
But
Excellent.
yeah, it's been a crazy. God, I wish that I had like somehow I kept track of every hour, because I've sat down and tried to think about it a couple times, because I'm like, it has to be huge, and it's I should have like somehow kept track or something.
Probably not. Maybe better.
Yeah,
That's
maybe not.
that's
Maybe
the
not.
gamer in you that wants to go to your home menu and look at the number of hours you put into Monster Hunter, and it's
Yeah.
everybody's
It's
proud of that kind of stuff, and it's really kind of sad when you step back from it, like, dude,
yeah,
you spent like literally, 6 months of your life playing Monster Hunter, you're never getting
Yeah.
those 6 months back, right? You know that, right?
Yeah, it is true. It probably would be a little bit of a
But you have a product to show for it. That's the difference. It's not just a nice armor set,
yeah.
that you from killing fake dragons. You.
That's true.
Yeah, but you have not only a great resume now, you have something that's genuinely fun and really cool to play. AKA art, to show off,
Right.
and hopefully a gateway to the next thing. But we'll get to that.
Right.
Just circling on to Membrane. So you just to be clear, you did everything
Yep.
here. You did music, you did graphics, you coded, you bug tested. Other than maybe workshops in college or play testing with other students in the program, did you have any outside help for this, or this is all Seth Scott?
Yeah, it's all me. My wife definitely helped out with some of the art, especially in the like kind of narrative stuff, the narrative sequences.
Okay.
And she also helped with a lot of kind of design decisions and some game design stuff. But yeah, ultimately, everything was done by me or by us in terms
Wow.
of the design, the art, the music, the programming, the coding, the
My
bug
God.
testing.
And when it comes to bug testing, I don't know a heck of a lot about that world, but does bug testing come down to you literally trying to break your own game, or is there any kind of checklist that Nintendo or anybody else gives you to run through? I really don't know a lot about that, and I'm a little curious just personally.
Yeah, I mean, I on top of that, like you did mention it, there's a lot of, so many hours of playtesting as well, by myself, but also by colleagues and other students, and then also just there's this thing that we do at the Game Center called Playtest Thursday, where every Thursday for a couple hours in the evening, you can bring your game and just set up, or you and it doesn't just have to be people in the program, like it's open to the public. You can set up your game and people just play it, or people can bring their game from their home or whatever, and it's framed as like play testing, so people go there expecting weird single levels or broken games or things, and so it's a very something the Game Center is very big about, and also myself is just playtesting, because it's scary to give somebody something that is broken or is not perfect.
I can only imagine. You have. I can imagine not knowing the intricacies of game design, but at least you have the slightest advantage in that you're doing a project which is somewhat manageable to play test on some level, and then you can have the sympathy for the Mass Effects or any 3D environment game of the world where everyone's laughing when it rolls out and things are broken, and it's like, do you have any idea how much testing needs to go into this to even test one section of one aspect of this game, much less an enormous multifaceted environment? Your game is a more classic style of gaming where it doesn't make it easy, but at least the problem is something I can conceive of, that I can think, okay, if I was going to try and break this game, what would I do? And I can come up with a couple ideas already. I'm like, well, it's all the interactions your character in this game has with water, or has with the different textures or switches in the game and things like that. Try to mess with the basic mechanics of each level. But since also the game is somewhat bound by screen, it's usually single screen puzzles for the most part, that I've found so far, I'll say. But on that note, that it's I can see it being doable, but that would be something very scary to me, because in art you tend to find the thing you didn't think of is your worst enemy, and how do you think of the thing you haven't thought of? That is in fact playtesting, I suppose, right?
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's surprising. Even I've been very mad at myself in those thousands of hours working on this game, where I was like, man, why did I make a game that's like a lot about creating physics structure? Because like it's like the second you, and it's actually something that I've grown to love, and a reason why actually one of my most proud things about the game personally is just every time I show it at an event or see somebody play it for the first time, whether it's in person or even like on like videos like yours or other like Let's Play stuff, I see somebody do something that I had never thought of myself or tried.
Right.
And like during playtesting and in that element, it sucks because I'm like, oh shit, they just like break something right away or whatever. But
that is the danger. Yeah, that's actually true. The danger of your game is that it's got a creative element to it. I mean, the basic function of the game is to be creative and solve puzzles, and so yeah. Right. I mean, because immediately the first thing I literally encountered this the other night, a problem you would have had to make a decision in design, where I didn't realize, as far as I've been able to detect, I didn't realize one of the rules of the game that you only find out when you try to do it is you cannot create a line of I don't know what you call them, the squares you can build. For those listening that have never played the game, one of the main mechanics is that you can build things. Your character can shoot small squares that glue together, and you can basically build a bridge out of it, or you can build a platform to stand on, and they generally stick to the wall. Well, I thought I'd solved a puzzle because I'd make one bridge, I'd make another bridge coming from the other direction, I'd leap through it, and then I'd glue it together. And the rule seems to be that you cannot glue two distinct structures together once they're established, unless they were begun as a single thing. And I was like, he must have limited that for some reason, A, to either design levels around, or B, it would cause a problem. But I suspect it was a little bit of both camps there. But I can only imagine those kind of decisions coming up as you see people break things and think, oh, I've got to limit that, or that doesn't interact with that other element of the game correctly. So
yeah, I mean, that's funny that you noticed that, because it's definitely, that was a thing that has worked both ways throughout the game, where they did, at one point they did connect if you did that, and obviously now they don't, and that was a purposeful design decision. But yeah, there's like tons of it's still surprising me actually how many situations like that occur, even with the limited kind of tool set and environmental kind of stuff that I have in this game.
Right. Well, that's the neat thing. That's what keeps you coming back to it. And that for the listeners is, if it's opaque what we're talking about, and perhaps you're not familiar with World of Goo, the neat thing about both that, very famous indie game and Seth's game Membrane is that the levels really do give you a sense, if not the reality, and in many cases it is a reality, of multiple solutions, that you're able to solve puzzles different ways. And it really becomes clever, in my opinion, when you have such a simple layout of a level. You might have a level as simple as you have a giant boulder on one side of the screen. You can see that you need to move the boulder across the screen, but there's a giant pit in your way. And then there might be some other obstacle to it that makes it a little more difficult. And you realize, oh, I could try to bounce it across the pit, or I could try to build a bridge, or I could throw it down into the pit and then go down there and try to build platforms and push it out, or something. I'm just making up a conceptual level, but that the simplicity of many levels, when you first open them up, you think, I'm going to beat this in 10 seconds. And then sometimes it's true. You'll throw us a bone and it'll be like this simple level with like a nice, elegant solution that's obvious but fun to achieve. And then the next level, it'll just be this one that it's 40 minutes later and you know the solution now, but you can't get it done because something always breaks just as you're about to do it, and you're tumbling back, you're hitting that quick reset button again and again and again. And that was my evening the other night, in fact.
Nice.
But circling on to, so you did everything, we talked about that. You have some just excellent music in here, and I've followed you on Twitter for a little while. I think, could you say your Twitter handle just for anyone who's listening and wants to check you out?
Sure. It's Sets with it doesn't really sound or spell like it sounds, I guess, but it's 3 S's, ETZ.
Okay. So I've been following Sets with a Z on the end for quite a while, and I believe you've posted music before. So I guess my question is, I guess you have kind of an interest in making music, or maybe that kind of went hand in hand with this game design. I kind of want to ask you about that. Were you doing that independently of designing the game, or was it kind of hand in hand? And also, what kind of musical influences would you say like lent themselves to the soundtrack for this game? Because it really stands out. The soundtrack is just excellent, and I just love it. And it really, it's the perfect sort of soundtrack for a game where you might be on the same level for many minutes at a time, and it's got a loop eventually, which is a really tricky, tightrope to walk, where you're not going to like make the player turn off the music and just go and put on their own music, and I find myself listening to it and really enjoying the kind of dynamic nature of the music that changes contextually in the game, but also just the general sound you created there. So I'd like to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I mean, it's all those things you're saying are really awesome to hear somebody else find those things from it. But yeah, it's I definitely have been a big fan of making music for a while now. I've been in a couple different bands. My wife and I actually play music together in a band. But
give the name. Give a little hype.
We're called Pancakes.
The pancakes, just pancakes. Period. Okay.
Just pancakes. Yeah. Gotcha. Actually, there's an exclamation point at the end. So
okay. Pancakes.
Yeah. Pancakes. Yeah. But yeah, so the music, I usually, outside of band stuff, the kind of music that I personally kind of do on my own or whatever tends to be a little more instrumental, or kind of more like score based, something you'd see in a movie or a game, or something that has a little more kind of slower elements to it, and kind of not as like strict songwriting type style of music. And yeah, I knew that I've been really into bands or different musicians that kind of use lots of like very tactile type stuff, or try and create these weird atmospheres or environments for their songs.
Right. It's very atmospheric. That's the first adjective that almost comes to mind. But it's a cheat to say that, because it doesn't tell anyone what you sound like when I want to say that. So yeah, I hear what I know exactly what you're getting at. Like, I don't know, I'm not hip enough. There's like all these new genres these days, like chill wave or synth wave and things like that. And those words pop to mind, but I don't know if I'm using them right when I say it, when I try to describe the music in your game. Are you even as the composer able to like get close to a genre that you would describe, so that someone who hasn't heard it would even have an idea? Because I'm stuck. It's chill. It's psychedelic. It's when you move around the level, like when you go underwater, the pitch shifts and bends and wiggles almost like you're underwater, which is a super cool effect that I just do it for fun when I'm in the level. I'm like, let's see what it sounds like underwater for a second,
Nice. Love it.
Yeah, but it's tough to pigeonhole.
Yeah,
or put you in a box for that.
I don't know if I'm hip enough either to know or to like know what it's called. There's so much weird. Yeah, it's actually, I'm always like impressed. I'm like, man, they came up with like a new thing to call music, and it's always like some weird, cool thing that's, called like, I don't know, lo-fi, like metro wave or something. And it's like, what does it even mean? But
and you lived in Brooklyn. I mean, like, I can only imagine the number of genres you see on a mere flyer on a daily basis.
It's totally true.
I love Brooklyn. Shout out to Brooklyn. I love the music scene up there. Some of my favorite bands have come from there. So, just saying.
No, yeah, there's so much great music here. It's pretty amazing.
Totally. Well, we can leave that aside. People can check it out. I mean, it's really tough to ask you about. I mean, I
will say this one thing. I definitely wanted it to have this little bit of a like analog tape feel to it. That it's kind of like you're listening to it on the tape deck, and it's a little bit like slogging a little bit, and it's like a little bit out of tune. And so when I was I use a Teenage Engineering OP1 synthesizer. Okay. It's like I use it in tandem with like a Ableton digital kind of audio interface, but the synthesizer I use for a lot of my stuff or kind of music creation, it's a fantastic thing. It's the coolest, most high-tech toy you'll ever make music on. Nice. And like it has this amazing display, and it's very kind of analog in its digitalness. And nice. Like you literally, when you record stuff on it, it's on like a reel-to-reel thing that you can. like it's not a real, it's like it's a digital reel to reel kind of 4-track.
Okay.
But you can like do the stuff you can do on a reel to reel. Like I don't know, it's weird, but I knew that I wanted. I could talk about it for a while, but I knew that I wanted Membrane to have this kind of analog-ish feel to the sound, and so like when you collect the 2 little orbs in each level, it does this like tape slowdown, like it kind of like, it's very subtle, but like it has this cool weird like somebody's speeding up or slowing down the tape, and like you were saying, the underwater thing. Or when you die or reset a level, it does this really quick pitch bend. And so there's just
I can hear all these in my head from having played the game so much. It's so fun when you tell me this, because I think, oh, I didn't realize it, and now that I hear it, I mean, I'm not hip, but I mean, in Brooklyn hipness, I do have a tape deck with analog cassettes sitting only 5 feet from me here, so I'm not totally unhip, you know, if you know what I'm saying, Brooklyn style. But like, I love it, and I especially love it because, shout out to the guys on my podcast, they all think of me as the old weird retro guy, and I'm like, they just don't understand that everything that's retro will become new again eventually. They just haven't been around long enough to know that yet. So I'm big analog fan right there. That's amazing, and I love hearing about this tech that you did it on, because that you did it with such intention to achieve that, especially the sound effect that you described when you grab the orbs. That just kills me every time, because it's such a cool sound effect, that the way it takes the background sound and just bends everything for a split second. It gives just such a strange, like, such a strange sound effect to the game. Like the noise effect when you reset, like you named, you know, that stuff just the best. I could go on as well, but we should get through some more questions, because the music alone in this game is worth picking it up. I say that with sincerity to folks that are listening.
And shout out actually to I had some of the elements of that analog in there, but my wife was the one that we were trying to figure out the perfect sound for the collectibles, and we couldn't get it just right. And she was like, you should like bend that note a little bit instead of just having a sound effect. And then like I worked on the code to do it that day, and like that night I listened to it, I was like, oh my god, this is so cool. It doesn't even matter. I was like, it doesn't even matter what the sound effect is anymore. I just need it to do this like weird analog pitch shift. And we were both like so jazzed after that.
How cool. That's so cool. Like those little things that you got. Like, I mean, just think like going forward, being a one-man, you know, operation so far, if you morph this into multiple people, you know, it can be really difficult to work with others, but just a little story like that exemplifying like what sometimes, you know, the outside mind can bring to a project, that's awesome.
It's those little things are cool, because you're like, it's got to be a perfect sound effect, it can't be anything else, and then you're like, oh no, there is these other weird design elements that you can do that like take it out of just being a sound effect, and then you're like, oh, it opens up the door.
It's tough when you're that close to a project. I know that feeling a lot, that I have to like stop and get input occasionally, and then just be blown away that you know, you solved my problem by just being someone else and saying a different idea. So
totally.
So let's see here, let's hit a few more questions. Let's see, we got, I mean, like in a nutshell, there were probably a million stumbling blocks on this road to victory, but what would be the one or two biggest challenges? I mean, were there moments where this wasn't going to work, where you almost scrapped the project, or just implementing specific ideas? Or was there anything that sticks out to you that was like the really big challenge?
Probably the biggest thing, one of the things that ended up probably causing me the most hours of work was getting the electricity to function correctly.
Okay, just let me give the audience a little bit of a read on what that is. In the game, as a player, not as the designer, the way it strikes me is further in the game, you start to have to connect circuits. You'll have a section of the board that has electricity. In order to open a gate or to escape, you have to run wires effectively. You have to create and build wires to connect the electricity, and there will all be kinds of puzzles that'll make that difficult. You also can't touch the wires when you're working on them, or you will die. So it gets very tricky. So that I can see that being a problem. So with that in mind, this was hard to implement.
Yeah, it was, it was something that I knew I wanted because I was like, man, it would as I was developing the game in the early stages, it was like, oh yeah, it's great, these blocks are your friend, you use them to build stuff. I was like, oh, it'd be cool if like all of a sudden you had to build stuff with them, but then you couldn't use them to build ladders or bridges and stuff to run on, or you had to be like more thoughtful about these things that have been nice to you the whole game, and then all of a sudden they're dangerous when you use them.
Right. Right. Yeah. Once you've electrified a section of the board, you can't stand on it. You are your own. Yeah. Your own material for creating is now a danger to you, and you will find that very frustrating if you are a devoted player as you get toward the end. Frustrating in a positive video game way that you thought you had it solved, and then you will move one pixel off and step on the wire and kill yourself, and you will be yelling.
Yeah.
You will be yelling at the game in the best way possible.
Yeah, there's definitely they get dangerous, and I will say this is a tiny tip if people are. There's actually a level that hopefully teaches it to you, but like there is a fuse a little bit that like as they're connecting, you're not.
Oh yeah, right. The electricity travels, and you can see it, and
right.
Yes, you will learn that. I don't want to spoil anything, especially for some of my friends that I know that are playing this game currently and are probably going to listen to this interview. But like you said, there's a fuse. The electricity doesn't travel at light speed. It travels slightly slower than real electricity might. So,
right.
Right. So that was difficult to implement.
Yeah, back to the original question. Yeah, it was something that it just was like the way that I'm communicating like behind the scenes with each of the little red bricks. There's a lot going on there with how they communicate to the one that they're connected to or to other blocks. Kind of going back to what you were saying earlier with like how they don't stick to each other if they're already part of a formed arm or something. There's a lot of communication there, and the electricity just added this whole other element where instead of just checking for collisions with other blocks, there was this communication that they had to do whether or not they're passing electricity. It just was, to put it in the simplest way, it was just it took a lot of time to get that to be reliable, so that like if you cut the ammo or cut the bricks and got them back for ammo to replenish, like they would reset and turn off, and then they wouldn't kind of, I don't know, there was just lots of stuff, and it took a lot of time, even up to kind of the final push. There was still some bugs that I was dealing with that electric bricks.
Interesting, because it's the kind of thing when you start to think about a game's design and its mechanics under the hood. I can't even deny that I thought of that because I was preparing for this interview and playing the levels with these kind of things in mind, and I did think of how difficult that might have been to work. It's the kind of thing, at least I could say, occurred to me that could be the kind of thing that could break the game if it wasn't functioning perfectly. That the way you can break the wires and then they reset, as you were describing. But we're getting a little opaque for anyone who's never played it. But yeah, that makes sense. You'll understand if you play. I think it's like about World 4, roughly, numerically speaking, where you start to encounter the electricity, and it opens up a whole nother mechanic to the game, like a good video game should. You've played, you've learned, you've mastered, and now the game adds another feature that wasn't present whatsoever until that world, and then, oh wait, this just got way harder, is what you think to yourself as you encounter it. Like, this is really neat potential, but the game just upped the ante on me. So
nice.
Let's see, was there anything you wanted to get into the game that you ultimately had to just cut, that you said to yourself, this is either time wise, or it was just obvious that it had to go, or literally had to be chopped off in order to get the game out the door?
Let's see. I mean, I had a bunch more levels, I guess, I had a lot of levels that were kind of just something that I didn't feel were good enough to have in the final game.
Sure.
And a couple more like environment kind of obstacles or like things like the springs or the electricity or the red spinner blocks. A couple other things like that I felt were maybe a little like too similar to one or the other, and it was I really tried to make each of the kind of things that appear, the environmental hazards or things you can interact with outside of your two tools, to be distinct, and so that like you wouldn't be like, oh, is this the spinner that does this, or is this the spinner that does that?
Right.
There is one level I think where I liked the level, and it kind of is a one-off where the spinner is a little different than it functions in every other level.
Okay.
But it's not like crazy different, and
I understand what you're getting at, though, but it was a bit of like a level where, in the end, you made an editorial decision as a one-man team that you were fortunate enough in that situation to make and say, even though it may not completely fit the template, I'm going to play Miyamoto here, and I'm going to say, this stays in. Like, this is fun to me, and I'm leaving this in, whether or not you think the... I forget what it's called, Kirbio's shoe in that one level of Mario 3 or something like that. Even though this stands out like a sore thumb. Kirbio's shoe, like even though everyone for the rest of time is going to be like, what was that all about? Like that one level. But it was like, hey, that was neat. And it was memorable. And we grew up thinking about it. Well, that sounds like a really both lesson. I mean, it's the lesson any artist or any designer or anybody working in a creative field is going to learn at some point. What you're describing there is some of the toughest things are deciding what to cut. You build, and then you have to cut things, and well, maybe someday Membrane is going to take off and you can do a director's cut, and all these things can make it into the into the director's cut.
that would be cool. I always, the one thing that I always knew is like I personally, especially now getting older and like maybe not getting the time to play as many games as I used to, is like I love beating a game and being like, that game was great, I finished it, it's done, I can move on from it in my mind. And there's some of these bigger games now that I enjoy as well, like Breath of the Wild or something that I'll beat but I'm never going to perfect, but and I still enjoy those, but I feel like a lot of games nowadays are moving more towards just like so much content that players can't complain about spending $60 on it or something, because there's like, oh well, you can keep doing stuff, you didn't beat it yet. And I personally will pay $60 or $20 or whatever for a game, and I don't really care about the length. And I knew with Membrane I wanted it to be a nice little bookended experience that was somewhere that just felt good in its play and its length, and like it didn't outstay its welcome, and you weren't like, oh god, more levels. And so I tried to obviously there's no perfect answer or way to justify or quantify that, but I knew that I wanted it to be a nice kind of set of levels and a nice bookended thing that you can hopefully beat and be like, oh, that was great, and felt like a good length.
On behalf of every backlogged video gamer on the planet, may I say thank you for having that philosophy, and the indie space is great for that. I honestly completely identify with everything you're saying. I was thinking last night, I've been playing, it's almost a year now, Breath of the Wild's been out, and I haven't finished it yet. I have over 100 hours on it. I recently picked up Doom. I picked up Doom for Switch, and it's it's not nearly in the same scope, but if you want 100% it, it's quite a large game. Relatively, it's a large game. It's kind of quite a large game by modern standards. But I literally was thinking this very idea to myself last night. I thought, the older you get, the more you have to consider which games you even ever pick up, because it's almost a year. And granted, I could just sit down and be like some teenager who drills through Zelda. I enjoy sipping it like a fine wine. And I'm still at over 100 hours here, and I'm like, I could go to Ganon's castle, or Zelda's castle, and probably beat the game relatively quickly at this point. I need to finish off one more Guardian and do some other stuff, and I think I'd be at the end of the game. But it's not meant to be played that way, not for me.
Me neither. I couldn't agree with you more. It's literally like, I've been playing Breath of the Wild the same way. It's like, I did not want to just blow through it or even just beat it. It's something that I'm just enjoying. I made a decision like a couple months ago. I was like, you know what? I can I'll actually happily, kind of the opposite of what I was just saying. I was like, I'm happy to play Breath of the Wild for the rest of my life. And
Well,
just
there's
like
a space for both kind of games. That's the point.
yeah,
And your game fulfills that other niche where some of us
yeah,
sometimes want to finish something. You want to finish it. You want to see the
feels
game be
good.
done, and
Feels
say
good to finish it.
that was neat, like you said. Well, thank you for designing a game like that, because I do enjoy this, that Switch has become, and Nintendo is becoming a place where there's room for both. And I've been preaching this to anyone who would listen for years. I'm like, all Nintendo has to do is become the Steam machine. They have to be Nintendo plus Steam, and then there will be room for everything that you want on their console. You can play the new Mario, the new Zelda, the new Metroid, the new big game, and then you can download games of any stripe, whether it's an RPG, a tactical, a strategy game, a puzzle game like yours, and fill in the blank, because there's a lot of people out there that don't necessarily look for these, like, I think of as more classic experience, like what you're describing. You're describing a classic NES, not necessarily the same architecture, but like NES style game where there's an end. You can finish the game and say that was awesome. I beat Demon Sword this weekend. It was cool, awesome. Like, put it on the shelf. I'll play it again someday. But it's not, Skyrim, which I want to play, but I'm like, when am I gonna ever have time to play Skyrim from what everyone's told me? I just don't, I've got to figure out a place in my life for a game like that. Whereas your game, I can download it and just looking at the previews of it, knowing, well, this is that, I could see it. This is more that kind of game that I can dig into, enjoy it. The other day in a waiting room, play it for an hour while I'm waiting for an appointment, come home and throw it on and play it on the TV for a little while I'm waiting for dinner. And then if I really want to make a push, I can tell this is like a 10-hour game, a 20-hour game. It depends, on how good you are really on this one. But, neat. I know a lot of our listeners would want to know, how was the process? And if you feel the onus of not being able to speak fully on this, it's fine. I understand business relationships and professionalism, so that's totally fine. But I know a lot of our listeners would want a nutshell of how working with Nintendo was, like what the general experience of getting this game on a Nintendo platform, because at this point it's exclusive to Nintendo, if I'm not mistaken. And you had to, go through, famously, there's kind of all kinds of stories outside the industry of like how it is to get a game onto a Nintendo platform, historically speaking. Now, we hear, us peons hear, that it's getting easier for Switch, and it does look that way given the eShop's explosion of titles in the last few months. But how was it for you? How was your experience of the submission and approval and certification?
I think it's, obviously this is another thing that I could talk about for a while, but ultimately, it was a great experience. And, I definitely am not just going to say everything was awesome just because, I don't want to risk anything, but yeah, it was great. And I think the team that I worked with there was, personable and just like very genuine. You don't feel, at least in my case, I didn't feel like I was just like sending emails to a bot that was, giving me, just generic responses to stuff. There's, I know there's, a lot of people trying to kind of, or there is, like you said, lots of different kind of various stories about it, working with Nintendo or just working with any kind of publisher or something. And, I don't know. My only advice is, I just came up with an idea and a prototype in a game that I felt super proud of, and put a really professional pitch together that I felt, really proud of, and something I spent a lot of time just on itself doing, outside of the game, once kind of that phase got through and I was working with them and kind of developing the game, actually making the game, work on their hardware and stuff. There's obviously hurdles for me in terms of just, learning the hardware and that side of it, especially as, a smaller team. But, it was great, and something, I'm excited to, continue our relationship and, keep making games and putting them out on their platform.
Wow, excellent. Well, that's good to hear. The the stories we hear, they're all over the map, and you never know, and there's always two sides to everything. So, well, it's good to hear that they were at least responsive, and you were able to get through the process. Clearly, you were able to get through the process, and given that Switch has been out less than a year and you already have a game on it, I mean, that alone is something to be proud of. But it does speak to I think the writing's on the wall for those of us on the outside who are looking at your game. I would say that it tells a story to think that you're a one, maybe two person development team essentially, and you were able to get a game on their platform. First of all, it speaks highly of you, but it speaks well of them that they were responsive to you and that your game is now on there. I mean, it's a testament to me as a Nintendo fanboy openly that they weren't just blowing smoke when they said when they came out with Switch saying we want this to be an indie platform, and I was like banging my fist harder than anyone on the desk and like enjoy saying this is what you need to do, you're never going to beat the other consoles at the things they specialize in, not right now, you need to rebuild and you need to keep doing what you're good at the same time, and bringing those indies on, and then having the Nintendo Direct where they featured indies and have made that a big focus on and off again, and I think it's going to continue is my impression. And then from your side of it, saying they have the support staff there and the contacts there that you can get responses, and if you know what you're doing and send something in, it says a lot to say that you're not someone with a secretary handling calls and an administrative staff like handling the submission process. You're the one doing it, and you were able to do it while at the same time getting the game polished and out there. So that's just really cool to hear, and it's cool to see. It was one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you, because I thought, I can't believe that somebody did this. This is just not something I've seen before with Nintendo. You would have had to go back to the days of the NES where people were, the people that were publishing off-brand, that were making non-Nintendo certified games that were a couple people in a garage that reverse engineered the dev kits and stuff, and that managed to do this kind of thing, and they were doing it without permission, and ended up in court, so that they've made it easier, and and you can get through it. So that's just great to see. It was great, and it definitely was a more work and the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It wasn't easy, but that just goes to saying not just like the hardest thing was working with Nintendo, but just making the game, making it for the console, and making sure that it, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, is like, especially releasing a game on my personal webpage is one thing, but doing something like this that's like a lifelong goal of mine, and on a console that I'm a fan of, and like the possibility that it could be played by tons of people. It's like wanting to make sure that piece of art or piece of that game is as ideally perfect as it can be when it's first released is like unbelievably stressful, and was a lot was like imagine not it was just a lot to deal with. It's like going on stage, but you're going on stage in front of an invisible audience that might have 1 or 10 million people. I just can't imagine it.
Yeah, it's true. A visible audience that you never know the size of.
That's just amazing. Well, I think you've done a great job. Will it be coming out for any other platforms, or are you looking into that? Or are you just looking at the next thing now, and that's a possibility down the road? What's the future for Membrane in terms of that universe?
Yeah, I think I would love to bring it to other platforms. I'm definitely, it's not, it is exclusive right now, and I wanted to kind of focus on one console at a time, just as a smaller team as well, going back to that, just making sure it was good on the Switch for launch. But I'd love to, bring it to other consoles if that's a possibility. At some point, probably maybe in the summer or something, or maybe later this spring, release it on Steam and stuff like that. Because that's just, it's a tough marketplace, but it's also something that a lot of people enjoy playing games through. So, I definitely want
You shouldn't limit yourself. I mean, the exclusivity is nice, but you're not at the level where you can afford to make the exclusive decision unless there's something in it for you. So
exactly. No, that's totally true. Yeah, I definitely see it coming to Steam for sure, and then hopefully other consoles, but we'll see.
Nice, yeah. Until you get sick of working with your own game. Like at this point, if you'll probably need a break for a little while anyway. The exclusivity is a benefit at this point that you can put the game down for a few minutes.
I need a break from it for sure. But I did just finish the second little patch for it today, so I don't know if I'll have a break yet. But hopefully this, it's a very small patch stuff. It's nothing game breaking, but.
Cool. I didn't even know that you were patching it, but that's neat. That's good to hear you continuing support. Everyone always wants to hear that. Continuing support is good.
Yeah.
So besides, potentially, just to wrap up, besides potentially, taking Membrane on the road, other places, is there anything else on the horizon that you're thinking about? Any new ideas coming to mind? Anything in the, embryonic stage or stuff you can't talk about, obviously, or whatever?
Yeah. Jess, my wife Jess, and I have a huge list of game ideas that just some ideas that are like one sentence or just a title to games that have kind of more of a sketch prototype of what they are. But a lot of it right now is just been a lot of our focus this last year has just been getting this game out. Hopefully, it finds a life and some success, but you never know. And seeing kind of what the initial couple months are, and then going from there, and seeing if we're ideally, hopefully, able to keep focusing on games as our main career path, but finance and money is a reality. So if we have to do some other stuff and then have games kind of take a little bit of a backseat, that's a possibility too. But
gotta figure it out. I mean, you do live in Brooklyn, and there are certain expenses that go along with living in Brooklyn. You got to pay for that lifestyle.
It's true. It is super expensive.
I love Brooklyn. Again, I emphasize it. One of my good friends is a principal at a high school up there, and I love the whole area. It's just an amazing area to live. As a Philadelphian, I couldn't imagine affording it.
Yeah, no, it's unreal. And we're from New Mexico as well. I mean, we were born on the East Coast, but we both grew up in New Mexico, and so New Mexico is unbelievably cheap compared to here. But regardless of that, we're definitely gonna, we're not just gonna have this Membrane be our last effort, even if it, for some reason makes $0 or whatever. We're not going to have it be the last thing game-wise we make. We're still going to be making games for a while.
Great. That's good to hear, because you really should, as long as you don't go insane from the process of designing these wonderfully dense works of art. Your Studio Perfect hat is your first on the Switch effort anyway, is just awesome, and I really encourage the listeners that are listening to pick it up and support you so we can see what's next. And
thanks.
And like, I wasn't kidding. Get your resume with those guys over there at the I'm blanking, World of Goose Studio,
Morrow Corporation.
Because you are doing their work for them right here. I look at this and I'm like, this is the kind of thing they're clearly trying to do. So it's a great connection there in my mind, that I'm like, wow, I love both these kind of games. So I'm super glad to have found your game and been able to talk to you about it tonight. So
it's been fantastic. Thank you.
Where can people look you up other than going straight to the eShop and downloading Membrane? Do you want them to follow you on Twitter, or go to your website, or ignore you entirely so you can have a private life?
No, I mean, Twitter's definitely the social media channel that I probably use the most, or kind of am visit regularly through at sets that we talked about earlier, or you can at Membrane Game as well. We do have Facebook and Instagram for Perfect Hat Games, and on Instagram, and Membrane has a page on Facebook.
Great.
Yeah, I don't know.
They'll find you out there somewhere. As they Google around for the Membrane Game is one way to find it. And like you said, it's S. Your Twitter handle is 3 S's ETZ. That's 3 S's ETZ.
Yes,
Seth,
3 S's.
and
My initials are 3 S's, so
perfect.
That's yeah.
Perfect. Well, anyway, thank you for coming on. We went a lot longer than I planned. We'll see how much of this interview I can get on the show. Maybe we'll break it up into a couple segments, but
Cool.
hopefully we can get you a little bit of exposure on our humble little podcast. And
appreciate being a part of it. It means a lot. So thank you guys so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been Just Another Castle podcast. I'm unoClay, unoClay_switch. But more importantly, check out Membrane. It's a great game, and you won't regret it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.